The sky tore open on a Thursday, not with thunder or fire, not with screams or destruction, but with silence so heavy it made the oceans hold their breath. Over every continent, over every city, ships appeared not falling, not flying, simply existing, like they had always been there, and the world had just now remembered to notice. They were beautiful in the way deep water is beautiful. Perfect, cold, ancient, they cast no shadows, they hummed without sound, they were shaped like thoughts no human mind could fully hold. Within moments, every broadcast signal on Earth collapsed and reassembled into one image. A face smooth, silver, eyes like distant galaxies, lips curled into something that could have been a smile or a threat. It did not speak, it only watched. Billions of humans stared back. Some wept, some prayed. Some took selfies, and still it watched for 73 seconds, then it vanished. The ships did not. They stayed in the sky, motionless, not invading, not communicating, just there, hovering like gods with no temples. At first, panic, markets crashed, militaries scrambled jets, satellites recalibrated, news anchors speculated wildly, governments assured their people that contact was being attempted, but nothing came. Not a word, not a signal, not a sound. 3 days passed. Then on the 4th, the broadcast began. Every screen lit up again, this time not with alien faces, but with our own. Footage of wars, of genocides, of mass shootings and burning cities, poverty, greed, pollution, betrayal, all of it set to laughter, not booming or cruel, just light, amused, casual, the laughter of someone watching a child stumble over and over again without learning. The message was clear. They had seen what we were and found it funny, not threatening, not tragic, just disappointing. World leaders demanded answers. Scientists begged for dialogue. Spiritual leaders called for patience. But the aliens did not respond. They moved through our skies like they owned the silence. And in the cities they began to land, slowly, carefully, one ship at a time. They emerged not as monsters but as travelers. Tall, thin, shimmering, they walked among us like tourists in a primitive museum. They touched buildings, sampled soil, stared at paintings. One knelt beside an old woman and mimicked her coughing. Another offered a strange fruit to a child. But they never spoke, never stayed, just moved on, always watching, always smiling and always laughing. It drove people mad. Entire religions collapsed. Protests erupted. Some praised the visitors as divine. Others cursed them as demons, but nothing changed. The broadcasts continued. New clips now, current ones, fights in supermarkets, corrupt politicians, families breaking apart, our worst moments caught on camera and played back to us with that same echoing, infuriating laughter. A laughter that sounded too familiar now, like it had been waiting in our bones all along. Then came the tipping point. A global summit was arranged. Every nation sent representatives. Every screen prepared for live translation. The aliens were invited. One came, just one. It did not speak. It did not sit. It stood in the center of the chamber as leaders of the world pleaded for meaning. It listened. It tilted its head. Then it raised one hand and projected a new image onto the walls. Earth burning, broken, abandoned, and in the background a single word written in the alien script, translated into every human language. Inevitable. Then it vanished, no warning, no reaction. The summit ended in chaos. That night, a small group of engineers, hackers, and former intelligence officers sent a signal back, a challenge, a request, a single question embedded deep within a quantum code the aliens had been using to transmit their laughter. The message said, "Why are you laughing?" The next day, the broadcasts paused. The first and only pause since they began. For 5 minutes, the world held its breath. Then the image returned, not with war. Not with weapons, but with something far worse. The alien face again, close now, closer than ever, and the smile had changed, no longer amused, not angry either, just, tight, like the edges were straining to hold something back. Then came the voice, one word, one syllable, spoken in every language at once. Wait. And then the laughter returned, but softer now, slower, as if unsure, as if unsettled. That night, in a military base buried under the Rockies, something else happened. One of the ships flickered, just once, like it had glitched, and when it did, a ripple passed through the others. Systems blinked, lights dimmed, signals scrambled, the world noticed. The aliens noticed too. And for the first time they moved not slowly, not elegantly, but suddenly, reactively, as if they had just remembered something, as if something unexpected had occurred, something that was not in their calculations. Somewhere in some lab or server or mind, a line had been crossed, a threshold triggered, the human signal had done something, the laughter had changed, and now the sky was no longer smiling, it was watching. Closely, tightly, as if holding its breath, because the question had been asked, and buried inside it was something ancient, something they might have hoped we would never realize, something that had just started to wake up. The day the laughter changed, the wind stopped in Colorado. Not just in one city, not just for 1 hour, but across the entire state and into neighboring regions, as if the atmosphere itself had flinched. Trees stood still, flags froze mid-wave, clouds hung motionless, as if the sky no longer trusted gravity. At first, meteorologists offered theories, scrambling for natural explanations. But deep in the hidden corridors of North Com, a general with 40 years of classified experience stared at the telemetry and said nothing. He knew something had responded, something had shifted. The laughter had changed its rhythm barely, but it was enough to make seasoned analysts stop what they were doing and lean closer to their monitors, because pattern recognition was not a hobby in that place, it was a religion. For the last 9 days, humanity had been the butt of a joke played out across every continent, every screen, every waking moment, and now, for the first time, the joke had stumbled. Somewhere in the digital transmission, a half-second beat went out of sync. A pause that should not have been there, a skip in the flow. And while most of the world continued to live and panic and pray under the eerie comedy broadcast by the gods above, a very small group of engineers, linguists, and military tacticians were narrowing their eyes and pushing further into frequencies they had not dared enter before. It was not just the pause that mattered, it was the reaction. The moment it happened, 17 alien ships shifted formation in low orbit, realigned without ceremony, and froze again, not like machines moving on routine protocol, but like animals turning their heads toward a distant sound. That sound had come from us. We had done something, even if we did not yet know what. But they did, and they were listening now. Somewhere beneath Geneva, a black site once used for Cold War secrets had become something new. A room without clocks, without windows, filled with voices in different languages, all saying the same thing over and over again. Why now? The aliens had ignored us for decades. No sightings, no probes, no ancient monuments or crop circles or signals from Alpha Centauri. Then suddenly they had arrived like critics at a failed performance, laughing at a show they had never paid to watch. But now, with one misplaced signal, one human question buried inside the chaos of frequencies, they had hesitated. That hesitation spread like fire in the minds of those paying attention. Not everyone, not yet. The general public was still distracted. Some were in awe, others in despair. The worst of humanity was trying to appease the visitors with offerings, with submission, with praise. The best of humanity was trying to understand, and in that understanding, something had begun to awaken. It started with a glitch not in alien tech, but in our own. An old Cold War surveillance satellite, decommissioned for 15 years, powered itself on without human input. It sent one file, one signal, and then it died again. The file was corrupted, incomplete, unreadable at first glance. But the pattern was unmistakable, binary, rhythmic, musical. Inside the hum of corrupted code was something that did not belong to any nation, any programmer, or any existing encryption model, but it was familiar, too familiar. It sounded like the laughter, but inverted. Slowed down, stripped of amusement, just the bones of the sound, like a heartbeat without a body, analysts began comparing it to the alien broadcast, then to global seismic activity, then to EEG readings of people in deep sleep, then to the breathing patterns of a fetus inside the womb. The results made no sense. The signal echoed across everything. It was like the laughter had always been here, just waiting for something to answer it. And now we had, maybe by accident, maybe not, that was when the first alien finally spoke, not in words, not in a voice, but through a dead child. In a small hospital outside Nairobi, a 6-year-old boy who had died of brain trauma 3 days earlier sat up on his gurney. His eyes glowed with light, Not fire, not energy, just light, cold and pure and terrifying. Doctors screamed, security fled, but one nurse stayed, rooted in place, unable to move as the boy turned his head toward her and opened his mouth. What came out was not human, not alien either. It was both, a hybrid tongue, ancient and immediate. One sentence, spoken once, "Do not finish what you have started." Then the boy collapsed again, dead. Bloodless, empty, every news agency buried the story. Officials declared it a hoax, but the footage leaked, and when it did, something snapped across the planet. The laughter continued on every screen. But it no longer sounded amused. It sounded strained, and now, finally, the people were listening. Not just the leaders, not just the scientists, but the average citizen who had tried to pretend none of it was real. Who had tried to hide in jobs and games and old comforts. They were hearing something they could not unhear, the shift, the change. The moment the gods above us had blinked, questions began to surface. What had we started? What had the signal really done? What if the aliens were not the ones in control? What if they were not the origin of the laughter at all? What if they were afraid of it too? Somewhere in deep space, beyond the edge of visible stars, a receiver that had been silent for 2 million years activated. It turned toward Earth, and it began to send something back. Somewhere beyond the belt of dying stars, past the edges of all mapped space, a thing that did not breathe and did not sleep began to listen. It had not moved in 1,000,000 years. It had not needed to. It was older than speech, older than light, built not by hands but by decisions made before time was measured. The moment Earth's accidental signal reached it fractured, desperate, human it shifted, almost imperceptibly, and deep within its cold geometry, something began to turn. It was not a response, not yet. It was something worse. It was attention. Back on Earth, humanity did not know what it had awakened, but the silence was gone. The broadcasts had faltered. The rhythm of the alien laughter had hesitated. Only slightly, but in a world ruled now by rhythm, that hesitation was seismic. For weeks, the sky had been filled with laughter light, looping, mocking. Now it was offbeat, unstable, and still the alien ships floated above, unmoving and untouched. For the first time since their arrival, it seemed like the aliens themselves were unsure, like something had occurred that was not part of their plan. The change was subtle, but the right people noticed. In bunkers carved into Arctic rock, military cryptologists stared at the signals with silent horror. In underground data farms once built for marketing algorithms, AI systems flagged anomalies they were never trained to detect. Across Earth, animals behaved as if a storm had already passed but left its pressure behind. Dogs refused to bark, birds stopped singing, insects vanished, nothing screamed, but everything knew. The laughter had come from above. But now something else was arriving, something that made the sky seem small. In the Mojave Desert it came down, not like the alien ships that hovered like divine statues, but like a weapon, sharp, black. Not falling, but descending with finality, like a sentence being passed. It did not blaze, it did not explode. It struck the earth with a sound too low for ears, a sound felt in the bones and remembered in nightmares. There was no impact crater, just a shape like an obsidian blade embedded deep in the rock, humming with a frequency that drove men to silence. Satellites blinked out, drones failed, radar refused to recognize it. And yet it was there, undeniable, not a visitor, not a message, a key. Government forces encircled the site within minutes. No one could approach, not because they were stopped, but because they were overwhelmed. The closer they got, the harder it became to think, to breathe, to be, and still the thing hummed, matching the now broken rhythm of the alien laughter as if mocking it back. At the same moment on the other side of the world, a child born deaf in rural India woke up screaming. She had never heard sound in her life, but now she repeated a word over and over again, not in Hindi, not in English, but in something older, something no one could place. The footage went viral within hours. Linguists debated it, but a forgotten database in a Brazilian university translated the word first. It meant simply remember. In the Vatican, a priest tore out pages from a codex written in blood and hid them beneath the altar. In Beijing, a general shot his entire staff and then himself. In Seattle, a blind woman who had never spoken began to draw spirals on the wall in her own hair. And still the laughter stuttered. The alien face had not returned. The broadcasts were weakening, something had changed, something had made even them falter. In the Pentagon, Elise Morrow, exhausted, feverish, brilliant, was the first to speak aloud what many feared to think. The laughter was not theirs. She said it slowly, like peeling back skin. They are not mocking us. They are warning us. It did not make sense at first. Why would superior beings bother with warnings? Why not just leave or rule or destroy? But when Elise showed them the final broadcast frame, the room went silent. A single still image, just one, the alien face, no longer smiling, no longer smug. Frozen in terror, not of us, but of something else. Something just behind the camera, behind the signal, behind the sound, a presence, a shadow pressing into view. They had come not to taunt us, but to prepare us. To watch the moment when something older, something far more dangerous than either of us, responded. Something that had once burned across the stars and been buried beneath memory, and now we had reached it. Woken it, invited it. The alien laughter had always been nervous, hollow, because they knew what we did not, that Earth was never meant to be left alone, that our chaos, our noise, our impossible resilience, all of it was a signal. A flare in the void, and now something had seen it. From the edge of the galaxy, a second structure opened, and this one did not listen. It spoke. Somewhere beyond the belt of dying stars, past the edges of all mapped space, a thing that did not breathe and did not sleep began to listen. It had not moved in 1,000,000 years. It had not needed to. It was older than speech, older than light, built not by hands but by decisions made before time was measured. The moment Earth's accidental signal reached it fractured, desperate, human, it shifted, almost imperceptibly and deep within its cold geometry. Something began to turn. It was not a response, not yet. It was something worse. It was attention. Back on Earth, humanity did not know what it had awakened, but the silence was gone. The broadcasts had faltered. The rhythm of the alien laughter had hesitated. Only slightly, but in a world ruled now by rhythm, that hesitation was seismic. For weeks, the sky had been filled with laughter light, looping, mocking. Now it was offbeat, unstable, and still the alien ships floated above, unmoving and untouched. For the first time since their arrival, it seemed like the aliens themselves were unsure, like something had occurred that was not part of their plan. The change was subtle, but the right people noticed. In bunkers carved into Arctic rock, military cryptologists stared at the signals with silent horror. In underground data farms once built for marketing algorithms, AI systems flagged anomalies they were never trained to detect. Across Earth, animals behaved as if a storm had already passed but left its pressure behind. Dogs refused to bark. Birds stopped singing. Insects vanished. Nothing screamed, but everything knew. The laughter had come from above. But now something else was arriving, something that made the sky seem small. In the Mojave Desert it came down, not like the alien ships that hovered like divine statues, but like a weapon, sharp, black. Not falling but descending with finality like a sentence being passed. It did not blaze, it did not explode, it struck the earth with a sound too low for ears, a sound felt in the bones and remembered in nightmares. There was no impact crater, just a shape like an obsidian blade embedded deep in the rock, humming with a frequency that drove men to silence. Satellites blinked out, drones failed, radar refused to recognize it. And yet it was there, undeniable, not a visitor, not a message, a key. Government forces encircled the site within minutes. No one could approach, not because they were stopped, but because they were overwhelmed. The closer they got, the harder it became to think, to breathe, to be, and still the thing hummed, matching the now broken rhythm of the alien laughter, as if mocking it back. At the same moment, on the other side of the world, a child born deaf in rural India woke up screaming. She had never heard sound in her life, but now she repeated a word over and over again, not in Hindi, not in English, but in something older, something no one could place. The footage went viral within hours. Linguists debated it, but a forgotten database in a Brazilian university translated the word first. It meant, simply, remember. In the Vatican, a priest tore out pages from a codex written in blood and hid them beneath the altar. In Beijing, a general shot his entire staff and then himself. In Seattle, a blind woman who had never spoken began to draw spirals on the wall in her own hair, and still the laughter stuttered. The alien face had not returned. The broadcasts were weakening, something had changed, something had made even them falter. In the Pentagon, Elise Morrow, exhausted, feverish, brilliant, was the first to speak aloud what many feared to think. The laughter was not theirs. She said it slowly, like peeling back skin. They are not mocking us, they are warning us. It did not make sense at first. Why would superior beings bother with warnings? Why not just leave or rule or destroy? But when Elise showed them the final broadcast frame, the room went silent. A single still image, just one, the alien face, no longer smiling, no longer smug. Frozen in terror, not of us, but of something else, something just behind the camera, behind the signal, behind the sound, a presence, a shadow pressing into view. They had come not to taunt us, but to prepare us. To watch the moment when something older, something far more dangerous than either of us, responded. Something that had once burned across the stars and been buried beneath memory, and now we had reached it. Woken it, invited it. The alien laughter had always been nervous, hollow, because they knew what we did not, that Earth was never meant to be left alone, that our chaos, our noise, our impossible resilience, all of it was a signal. A flare in the void, and now something had seen it. From the edge of the galaxy, a second structure opened, and this one did not listen. It spoke. It did not speak in language, but in memory, not ours, but its own. And when it did, the stars above Earth dimmed not all at once, not in a way that could be measured by telescope or sensor, but like a breath being held across the firmament, as if the universe itself was afraid to interrupt. The structure that had opened beyond known space did not resemble anything the aliens had built. There were no smooth surfaces, no elegant geometry, no shimmering lights. It was jagged, asymmetrical. It twisted in ways that defied laws our minds were still trying to invent. The broadcast came next, not to one screen, not to one language, but everywhere, all at once. No announcement, no warning, just an eruption of noise. Not static, not signal, just sound so raw and layered that people fell to their knees clutching their ears, even though the sound came not through speakers or air, but through the marrow of their bones. For 72 seconds the world screamed, buildings cracked, oceans pulled back, machines shut down, and when it stopped, the silence that followed was not peaceful. It was hollow, thin, waiting. The alien ships above Earth flickered. Not with light, with fear. The elegant shapes that had moved with divine detachment now trembled ever so slightly, like prey caught in the scent of a predator. For the first time, one of the ships left. Not to attack, not to regroup. It simply vanished, and then another, then 5 more, until only a few remained, and they no longer moved with confidence. On Earth, panic turned into questions. Why were the aliens retreating? What had frightened them? What had they heard in the sound that we, the creators of it, could not yet understand? Elise Morrow found part of the answer. Working in a blackout bunker, she filtered the signal into slow-motion spectrographs, mapping frequency against light decay, against seismic shifts, against atmospheric density. The pattern she found was older than math, older than sound. It was a sequence, a spiral of destructive intention, not a message, a warning, and not to us, to them, the aliens, the ones who had hovered over our cities with smug silence, now reduced to spectators themselves. The signal had not been for humanity, it had been for whatever had been watching them, something older, something that had once burned civilizations like paper. Elise's screen began to glitch, then melt. Not with heat, but with interference, shapes distorted, letters rearranged, words bled into the frame, and then, from the corrupted image, a single phrase emerged, not spoken, not printed, just present. The cycle has begun again. She wrote it down with a shaking hand, not because she feared forgetting it, but because she feared it was the last thing she would ever read. In the desert, the black blade-shaped object began to hum louder. Its frequency now matched the new signal. The two were synchronizing, not like allies, but like pieces of the same ancient puzzle, finally returned to the same table. Military personnel near the site began to lose time. An entire squad stood frozen for 4 hours, unaware they had not moved. Cameras caught the footage. The men had not blinked, not once, not until the humming stopped. Then they screamed, not words, not language. Just a shriek so primal it cracked helmets. One soldier, before falling unconscious, scratched something into the ground with his bloodied fingers. A symbol, a spiral. the same one Elise had seen. Thousands of miles away, a glacier in Greenland split open, not from heat, not from pressure, but from within. Something inside it had moved. Scientists scrambled for answers, but before they could reach the site, it collapsed into the ocean, and from the core a sound escaped, just for a moment, like metal grinding against time. In temples long buried beneath sand, sensors picked up tremors. Not earthquakes, resonances, vibrations matching the Mojave object. All of them awakening. Across the world, old stories began to resurface. Not legends, not myths. Warnings. Cultures that had never touched each other had all drawn the same spiral, all described the same arrival. A watcher, a deceiver, a destroyer, a being that did not conquer but erased, not with fire, not with war, with silence, with forgetting, with the slow unraveling of meaning. The aliens had feared this thing. That was now clear. They had come not as invaders, but as archivists, as a last attempt to preserve what we were, before the cycle began again, before it reached us, and still, no human truly understood what it was. But it was moving, fast. Elise connected the final piece when she realized the signal was not only being received, it was being returned. Earth itself was answering, not our technology, not our machines. The crust, the core, the memory of the planet, as if something buried deep inside this world had once been part of the thing that now approached and was calling it home. She traced the spiral's curve to the oldest known fault line, the place where life had first sparked in the ocean. And in that curve she saw a countdown, a time loop, an event that had already happened and was happening again. Earth was not a battleground, it was a trigger, and the trigger had been pulled. From deep space beyond every known star, the thing that had once silenced galaxies began to unfold its form. Not a ship, not a being. A concept given shape, and it was looking at Earth now. They had been laughing, but not at us. Not really. That realization spread through the hidden halls of governments, and whispered across the shadow networks faster than any official announcement ever could. What the aliens feared was not humanity's violence, not our rebellion, not even the chaos of our nature. They feared what we might awaken, what might already be waking, and in their panic to study us, to mock us, to broadcast our shame across our own skies, they had been trying to delay the inevitable, but now the cycle had begun again, and even they had started to run. The last of the alien ships no longer hovered with confidence. They shifted constantly, reconfiguring patterns in low orbit, as if searching for an escape vector they had never expected to need. Their presence, once elegant and detached, had become frantic. Down on Earth, the black blade that had fallen into the Mojave began to vibrate faster, now pulsing in sync with something rising beneath the crust, something that had not moved in tens of thousands of years. Seismologists could no longer read the quakes. They were no longer tectonic, they were harmonic, rhythms that echoed across stone and metal alike. Frequencies were being matched in distant corners of the Earth where no one had been listening, but where the planet itself now seemed to hum with warning. In the depths of the Mariana Trench, an ancient communication cable once buried by sediment snapped with a single note, so loud it registered in the upper atmosphere. Thousands of miles away in Antarctica, a research drone fell from the sky just after transmitting an image of a circular indentation in the ice too perfect to be natural, too smooth to have been carved. Elise Morrow sat in a concrete room beneath the Pentagon and stared at a wall covered in overlapping spirals, each one drawn in different handwriting, some of them hers, some of them belonging to people she had never met, and all of them identical. She did not remember drawing the last one, but she recognized the pattern now. It was not just a signal or a countdown, it was a wound. Something had been cut open long ago and had never healed. The spirals were not invitations. They were scars, a memory burned into the world itself, repeating over and over like the echo of a scream that had never finished. She began to wonder whether Earth had been seeded not with life, but with memory, a planetary tombstone trying to remember what had killed it before. Elsewhere, the chaos spread in stranger ways. Electrical storms erupted in places without clouds. Radio towers picked up whispers in languages no human had ever spoken, but which caused spontaneous nosebleeds and hallucinations in anyone who listened for more than 30 seconds. Monuments crumbled, old statues cracked down the middle, not from erosion or time, but as if something inside the stone had shifted. In the streets, people began to see things, shapes moving in mirrors that were not reflections. Blurred figures standing in shadows where no one should be. Children pointed at the sky and cried when adults told them nothing was there. Something was seeping into reality, not through force but through resonance. And all the while the humming deepened. The Mojave blade's frequency had begun to change, becoming lower, slower, but more powerful. It was no longer sending, it was receiving, as if waiting for permission to open. In Geneva, a physicist named Dorian Nakai cracked a layer of the signal Elise had been analyzing. When slowed by a factor of 10 million, the audio became clear speech, not alien, not human, but something in between. The message was not a declaration, it was a eulogy, a farewell spoken in the past tense. To those who remain, we tried, we failed, it comes for memory, not blood. Burn the name, bury the light, forget us. Dorian shared this with Elise and then destroyed every copy. That night he walked into the lake and never returned. Elise read his last notes. He had scribbled something on the back of a photo, a child's drawing of a spiral done in red crayon. Below it he had written, "This is how it feeds, it makes us remember." And that was when she began to truly understand. The ancient force that had begun to respond was not coming to consume humanity's flesh. It was coming to unmake us from the inside. It fed on memory, on identity, on story. The more humanity remembered, the more of us there was to devour. Our history, our pain, our triumphs, all of it was like fuel for a fire that erased entire species not by killing them, but by convincing them they had never existed. It did not destroy, it erased, and it was already working. Elise pulled up global psychological data and saw a spike in dissociative identity episodes, mass amnesia events, entire towns reporting altered memories, people remembering children who had never been born, lovers they had never met, wars that had never happened. The spiral was taking hold. Reality was bending to match it. And when she overlaid those affected areas with the harmonic pulse maps, the match was perfect. It was not spreading through time or space. It was spreading through thought. In orbit, the last alien ship sent one final signal, not to the others, not to their own people, to us. It was a burst of raw code embedded in visual light. When decrypted, it formed a simple image Earth, covered in spirals, with a single word at the center, run. Then the ship vanished, not flew, not jumped, vanished, like a light switching off in an empty room. Elise stood in the silence of her command bunker and knew the truth. There was nowhere to run. Earth was not a location. It was the infection point, the origin of this cycle. Somehow we had created it, or had been chosen as its echo. Either way, it was waking up inside us, and there was no weapon that could stop it. She turned to the monitors. One screen showed footage from the Mojave. The blade was changing. Cracks had formed across its surface, glowing with soft light. The ground around it was breaking open in a perfect circle. It was not an artifact, it was an egg. Something was inside, and it was listening. All across the globe, every signal failed, not due to interference. Due to absence, no sound, no waves, just silence. The spirals stopped appearing, no more drawings, no more hallucinations, no more data. Everything just paused, like the entire world had taken a breath in perfect unison. And then, for the first time, Earth spoke back. A pulse erupted from the Mojave blade upward, outward, inward, hitting every part of the planet at once, passing through matter like it was nothing, carving its spiral into the invisible fabric between time and memory. Everyone felt it. Children screamed, the elderly fell into comas, birds dropped from the sky. Elise collapsed against the console, blood dripping from her ears, but before she blacked out, she heard one voice not spoken aloud, but carved into her mind like a scar across glass. It begins again, and then the world fell still. The world did not end with a bang or a flash or a final scream. It ended with a whisper none of us heard, and a silence none of us could survive. The pulse that came from the Mojave blade did not just strike the earth. It rewrote it. At first, nothing seemed different. The skies remained blue, the oceans did not boil, cities did not crumble, but something fundamental had shifted beneath the illusion of continuity. People blinked and forgot where they were. Roads ended in places that had never been built. Maps no longer matched the land they were supposed to represent. In museums, ancient artifacts changed shapes. Not visibly, but in memory, historians stared at relics and suddenly felt the deep certainty that they had never seen them before. Entire chapters of human history began to bend, world wars reversed roles. Dates shifted, cultures merged in ways that defied logic. It was not time travel, it was worse. It was the unraveling of context. The thing inside the blade had not emerged not yet, but it had whispered, and in doing so, it had placed a crack inside the narrative that held our species together. It fed not on flesh, not on blood, but on meaning, and now meaning itself was collapsing. Elise Morrow woke up in a different room than the one she had passed out in. There were no windows. Her name badge was gone. Her skin was marked with ink numbers running down her arm in a spiral pattern she did not remember receiving. Around her, machines hummed with unreadable symbols, and across the monitors were live feeds from cities she could no longer name, though she knew she had once walked their streets. Memory had become slippery. Each time she tried to grasp a fact, it slid sideways, but something inside her still held, a thread, a core. One phrase echoed, unshaken, deep in her bones. It begins again. She whispered it aloud, and the machines in the room all paused for a fraction of a second, like they had heard something they recognized. She was not alone in her survival. All across the world, those who had touched the signal analyst's code, breakers, children born with strange dreams, wanderers who never stayed in one place long enough to root, all of them remembered something. Not everything, not names or dates or places, but they remembered the fear, the pattern, the feeling that something was watching through their own eyes. In Tokyo, a man painted the same spiral on 1,000 pieces of paper, each one more detailed than the last. In Iceland, a blind girl began to sing in a voice older than language, and her song drew birds from across the world to circle the sky above her home. In Siberia, an abandoned mining site cracked open, revealing a perfect spiral tunnel descending into warmth where no heat source should have existed. These were not coincidences, they were markers. The spiral was becoming a system. And still the aliens were gone. Their departure had not been announced. Their ships had not exploded or fled in fire. They had simply vanished, erased the way words vanish from a blackboard, not violently, but efficiently. Whatever had come from beyond the stars had seen enough. It had studied us, it had laughed, it had warned, and now it had left us to face what they had once failed to contain. Elise tried to contact Central Command, but the systems responded with a message she could not translate. Every attempt to reboot global communications was met with static that hummed in spiral frequencies. The internet existed, but it no longer functioned as it once did. Information had become corrupted, not glitched, but remixed. Articles rewrote themselves. Images blended with impossible architecture. Videos played scenes that had never happened, with voices that felt familiar in ways no one could explain. It was not disinformation. It was narrative decay. Even the truth was beginning to forget itself. The blade in the Mojave had changed shape again. Now it pulsed like a heart, a faint rhythm barely visible to the naked eye, but when scientists tried to measure it, their equipment returned values that grew with every hour, as if it was counting something down, or up, or inward. An unmanned rover was sent into the crater, and the signal it transmitted before it died was a perfect reproduction of a human brain, wave not any specific persons, but the baseline of collective thought. The spiral had found its host, humanity itself. In a vault beneath the Vatican, a cardinal opened a locked box sealed centuries ago by popes who had no idea what it truly contained. Inside was a manuscript written in a language no scholar could read, but Elise, halfway across the world, began to dream in that same script. In the dream, she saw herself standing on a mountain of ash, surrounded by beings that had no faces, only memories. They did not speak, they only pointed at the sky, and when she looked up, she saw the spiral unfolding across the stars like a wound in the night. When she woke, she knew one thing with perfect clarity. It was no longer about the blade, it was no longer about the aliens. This had always been about Earth, about us, about the stories we tell ourselves to keep the dark from speaking back. And now the dark was telling its version. One that had no heroes, no villains, only witnesses. All over the world, people began to forget how to speak. Language broke down not in vocabulary, but in intent. People said words they did not mean, and then meant words they had not said. Lovers forgot each other's names. Parents forgot their children's faces. It was not that the memories were gone, they had simply been unanchored, floating, rewritten, but not entirely lost. In the deepest parts of the earth, in ancient tombs and buried monoliths, something still remembered. The stones hummed now, not metaphorically, literally. Geologists recorded tremors shaped like syllables. Seismic readings formed phrases. Earth itself was reciting the spiral. Elise, no longer sure who she was or what her purpose had ever been, found herself drawn toward the Mojave. Every road there had become warped, maps failed, GPS showed blank terrain, but still people walked, alone, in groups from all over the world, drawn not by force but by resonance, as if the thing beneath the blade had begun to call its audience. It did not want war, it wanted witnesses, because that is what the spiral did. It did not conquer, it did not punish. It showed you what you were and then made you question whether it had ever been real. Reality itself was becoming soft, and in the heart of the crater the blade cracked open, not like a machine, not like a door, like an eye, one that had been closed not for sleep, but out of mercy, and now, for the first time in countless cycles, it was beginning to see. It saw us, that was the first and final truth. When the eye within the Mojave blade opened, it did not blaze with fire or swirl with color. It did not scream with energy or unleash beams of power. It simply observed. It turned itself outward, and in that act the world changed again. Every human still able to think clearly felt it at the same moment, a jolt, like being caught in a lie you had told yourself for your entire life. The kind of violation that makes no sound, but strips you bare. The eye was not physical, not in the sense we understood. It was not made of matter, nor of glass, nor even of perception. It was made of remembrance. It was the fragment of something so old that time itself bent around its gaze. When it opened, it reached across continents, oceans, the sky above, and the crust below. And what it saw, it did not judge. It did not flinch, it only recorded. In that moment the idea of secrecy died. Thoughts bled into the open, private memories rippled through the collective consciousness. Soldiers wept as the faces of those they had killed flashed before them. Politicians clawed at their own throats, unable to stop the surfacing of lies so deeply buried they no longer remembered telling them. Strangers began reciting each other's childhood traumas, strangers no longer separated by name or face or nation. It was not a hive mind, it was not enlightenment, it was exposure, full and final. The spiral was not just unmaking history. It was forcing humanity to confront itself without filters, without fiction, without escape. For the first time, we were no longer able to lie to ourselves. For many, that was the moment sanity broke. Hospitals overflowed not with the injured, but with the shattered, not the physically wounded, but the existentially destroyed. Suicide, already rampant, became something else entirely, not an act of despair, but an attempt to escape visibility, to stop being seen. The spiral had become a lens, and the eye within the blade had become its aperture. It was not just showing us the truth, it was forcing us to become it. In the Vatican, the walls of the archive bled ink. Centuries of paper crumbled to dust in hours. The spiral did not fear dogma, it consumed it. Holy men stood in ashes and spoke the same phrase in unison: "We were never first." In Mecca, a ring of pilgrims began to walk in a new direction, no longer toward the center, but away from it, as if something beneath their feet had reversed the flow of belief. In Silicon Valley, digital servers burst into flame, not because of overload, but because data itself had begun to rewrite at such a rate that the hardware simply refused to exist under the weight of contradiction. All backups failed, all clouds collapsed, and yet, throughout the horror, the spiral began to clarify its purpose. It was not cruelty, it was not malevolence, it was pattern, a force that existed not to punish, but to restore balance through deletion. Like a gardener pruning rot, like a surgeon removing a memory tumor, it erased not because it hated, but because it remembered what we had forgotten, that all things must end, and some things must end again and again until we remember how they began. Elise Morrow, now changed in ways she could not fully name, walked through the wasteland that had once been a military checkpoint. She was no longer a lieutenant or a scientist or even an American. She was something else now, a vessel for fragments of insight, haunted by echoes of futures that might still arrive. Her skin glowed faintly in certain frequencies, her shadow no longer aligned with the sun. And her blood pulsed in time with the spiral. She was no longer alone. Across the world, others like her had emerged, touched by the spiral, reshaped by exposure to its truth. Some became violent, unable to cope with the collapse of identity. Others became silent, drifting across ruins like ghosts with nowhere left to haunt. But a few, like Elise, began to see the new pattern forming beneath the decay, a hidden geometry in the chaos, a language within the unraveling. It spoke not in words, but in recursion, images repeating with slight changes, dreams looping but shifting just enough to deliver meaning. The spiral was not only taking, it was offering, a chance, not to fight. Not to undo, but to choose how the forgetting would happen, to shape the end before it arrived. Elise reached the crater again, this time unopposed. The blade, or what remained of it, had split open like a husk. Inside, the eye floated above a basin of lightless shadow, pulsing with a rhythm too perfect to be natural. Around it, symbols drifted through the air, not written, not carved, but hovering as if memory had taken physical form. She stepped inside. The moment she crossed the boundary, she fell, not physically, not into darkness, but into memory that was not hers. She saw the first time the spiral had touched Earth, not in this age, but in a forgotten cycle. A civilization lost not to war, but to unmaking. She saw towers made of glass that sang, oceans that spoke, people who remembered everything but could say nothing. And she saw the moment the eye opened for them. The same silence, the same unraveling, the same plea, and then she saw something else, a single human, different from the others, who had chosen to carry memory instead of lose it, a witness, a carrier. A lighthouse built from pain. She understood now that had always been the choice, oblivion or burden, to forget and vanish, or to remember and suffer. The spiral did not force its will, it revealed it. It did not erase, it allowed erasure once truth became unbearable, and now it was offering the choice again. Elise knelt before the eye, arms open, mind wide. "Show me what must be remembered," she whispered. And the spiral answered, not with sound, not with vision, but with certainty, a final image. A city burning, not in fire, but in silence. A world without names. A species with no stories, and a single person walking alone, carrying the weight of what had been. The memory, the failure, the possibility, that was the price. To carry the spiral meant survival, but it also meant solitude. To hold the truth when no one else could. To remain aware when the world had chosen to forget. Outside, the wind began to twist into spiral storms. Trees bent in strange synchrony. Oceans rippled in geometric pulses. The earth was choosing. The memory of humanity was thinning. And still, Elise stood in the crater, alone with the eye, waiting for the spiral to decide if her mind would break, or become its last archive. The spiral began to write, not in books, not in code, but across the bones of the planet itself. Mountains began to shift, not violently, not erupting with force, but folding inward as if the earth was trying to erase its own peaks. Valleys flattened. Rivers ran in perfect curves that matched no natural flow, only the geometry of the spiral's influence. The world was not being destroyed, it was being edited, rewritten by something that did not understand the difference between erosion and language, between rock and history. The spiral had reached a threshold, and now it had begun to transcribe itself into everything, not just minds, not just memory, but matter. Skyscrapers leaned at impossible angles. Shadows fell where there was no light source. Time fractured in small ways. People woke from sleep to find hours missing, seconds repeating, moments that never seemed to resolve. Conversations looped, names dissolved mid-sentence. One man in Lagos looked into the mirror and aged 50 years in a blink. His wife, standing next to him, swore he had always looked that way. In Moscow, an entire train station vanished. Not in an explosion or collapse, it simply ceased to exist, erased so cleanly that even its foundations were forgotten. When questioned, people nearby insisted there had never been a station there at all. Maps redrew themselves. GPS became a spinning wheel of unknown coordinates. But the spiral was not chaos. That was the most terrifying part. There was order in it, a purpose, a meticulous unmaking. What it erased, it replaced with absence so complete it became elegant. There was no debris, no remains, only smoothness, silence, like a story reaching the last page and being rewritten before it could end. Elise stood at the edge of what had once been the Mojave crater. The blade was gone now, the eye had closed. What was left was something worse, a circular depression in the earth, filled with liquid darkness that reflected nothing. The spiral had moved on, but its influence remained. She watched as clouds above began to swirl, slow and deliberate, not by wind but by intention. The spiral was moving through the sky now, shaping weather, carving memory into atmosphere. Her skin no longer itched with warning, it pulsed in harmony. She had become an anchor, a fixed point in a dissolving world. The spiral did not erase her, not yet. It needed her, or it wanted her, or it simply recognized her as one who had chosen to carry the burden. Around her others had gathered, not many, a few dozen. People like her, altered, awakened, fractured but not broken. They said little. They stood in silence, watching the horizon bend and smooth and shimmer. They were becoming something else, not survivors, not heroes, witnesses. Their role was not to save, it was to see, to carry forward the memory of what once was, even as the spiral worked to make sure no trace remained. Across the ocean, in old European cities, language collapsed. Entire nations stopped speaking. Words decayed mid-thought. Letters fell from street signs. Schools became places of ritual instead of knowledge. Teachers stood before chalkboards and wept as every sentence they tried to write dissolved into spirals. In North America, governments disbanded, not through revolution, but forgetfulness. Orders no longer held weight. Laws no longer meant anything. Authority evaporated like breath in winter. People no longer needed permission to abandon systems. They simply forgot why the systems had ever mattered. Currency lost value. Not because of inflation or economics, but because no one could remember the purpose of paper. Coins became meaningless tokens. Banks became empty buildings filled with sleeping people who could not explain why they were there. In the Pacific, a signal rose from the ocean floor, not human, not alien. It was a harmonic echo, the planet singing back to the spiral, accepting its edits, and in return the spiral began to slow. Its rhythm became less aggressive, less erasing, more collaborative. The Earth was not resisting, it was adapting. That was the moment Elise understood the final, most damning truth. The spiral had not invaded Earth. It had always been part of it, buried, dormant, coiled like a dormant command inside the code of life itself. The aliens had not brought it. They had only witnessed it before on other worlds. They had tried to warn us not to awaken it, not out of malice, but pity. And we had laughed at them, because we did not understand that what they feared most was not us, it was what lived inside our shared story, what the Earth itself remembered and what memory alone could resurrect. The spiral was not a weapon, it was a cycle, and we had reached the point in that cycle where forgetting became necessary, to preserve the pattern, to prevent the infection of self-awareness from spreading too far. Somewhere above, the moon cracked, not with force, with choice, a clean fracture, a spiral, shaped break across its face as if it too was remembering its part in this. The stars behind it shimmered, then dimmed, not because of distance, but because the spiral had begun to edit the sky. Constellations disappeared, navigation failed, the universe itself was being redacted. Elise turned to the others around her. Some had started to cry, not out of fear, but grief. They could feel it, the last pieces of what humanity had built were coming undone. Not just our cities, not just our languages, but our purpose, our belief that we were climbing somewhere, becoming something, all of it was being unwritten, and yet Elise did not fall. She knelt beside a small pool of water that had formed at the crater's edge. In it her reflection flickered between who she was, who she had been, and something else, something not yet born. She understood then that the spiral was not erasing us out of cruelty, it was making room. Something was coming or returning, or remembering its way back into form, a being or a will or a collective purpose. The spiral was clearing the table so the next cycle could begin. And Elise, along with the others, had to decide whether to remain as they were or become part of what came next. She felt the invitation like heat behind her eyes, a voice without sound, a question without words. To stay human and vanish, or to dissolve identity and become memory itself, not die, not ascend, transform. She looked at the sky again. A single spiral now covered the entire northern hemisphere, visible in the clouds, etched into the light. People everywhere had begun to kneel, not in worship, not in surrender, but in recognition. This was how the story always ended, with silence, with clarity, with the burden passed on to those who refused to forget. Elise stood. She had made her choice. She would walk into the spiral. She would carry memory into whatever came next, not for glory, not for salvation, but because someone had to remember why the world had mattered at all. And behind her the spiral opened wider than the sky, deeper than time, waiting for her to step inside. She stepped forward, and the world did not shatter, it yielded. The spiral did not pull her. It allowed her. With every step Elise took toward the center of the pattern etched into the land, reality became quieter. Not silent, but quieter, like someone had pulled a veil across the noise of existence and only left the most essential vibrations intact. Wind no longer moved her hair. Gravity loosened its grip on her skin. Breath became a choice, not a necessity. The others watched from the rim of the crater, their eyes wide, their thoughts pressed tightly to their skulls, as if afraid they might leak out. They did not follow, not yet, perhaps not ever. She had been the first to see the spiral's truth clearly, and so she had become the one who would carry its last question into the unknown. The edge of the spiral shimmered as she crossed its threshold, and for the briefest instant she saw her entire life not in images, but in weight, the pull of grief, the ache of unanswered questions, the echo of laughter in a hallway long gone. She did not see a child or a soldier or a scientist. She saw a pattern, one she had mistaken for chance. All the decisions, all the coincidences, all the fears they had curved inward toward this moment. She was not chosen, she was inevitable. The spiral had always been waiting for her, just as it had waited for others before her. As she moved deeper, the space around her ceased to follow geometry. Straight lines curved. The horizon became a circle. There was no up, no down, only inward. Structures that looked like thoughts materialized around her, shapes of emotion, scaffolding built from regret and potential. She walked through halls of memory, each one more real than the world she had left. Here the past had not died, it had rooted itself into architecture, a staircase made of childhood dreams, a window of wars never fought, a floor paved with unanswered prayers. None of it hurt. That was the worst part. The spiral did not torment. It showed, it unfolded, and as it did, Elise began to understand what she had never dared to believe. The spiral was not a weapon. It was a mirror for civilizations, one they only found when they had reached the point of self-recognition, of collapse, of becoming aware enough to look into the void and ask why. The aliens had faced this. They had failed to answer it. They had tried to warn us, but their fear had tainted their clarity. They had left us not out of cruelty, but because they could not bear to witness it again. But now Elise walked where they had refused to go. The center of the spiral opened before her, a chamber without walls, without form, made of memory so dense it became matter. Here she felt the presence, not a god, not a mind, a will, something ancient. Not infinite, something that had a beginning and had never forgotten it. The spiral was its method, not for control, not for destruction, but for renewal. It offered remembrance so complete that it burned falsehood away. What remained afterward was not civilization, not species, not even self. What remained was the seed, the raw, unshaped potential of what could be, free from the distortion of what had been. This was why memory had to be erased. Not as punishment, but as preparation, to make space for something else, to remove the tangle of trauma and ego and mythology so the core could be nurtured again. Elise stood at the center, surrounded by the remnants of every truth humanity had buried. Not secrets, those had faded already. These were deeper, older, the collective refusal to be vulnerable, the stories told to justify harm, the myths invented to avoid responsibility. The spiral laid them all bare. And as it did, it asked her without words, without force, if she was willing to let go of being human, to step beyond identity, to become the first line of a new story, knowing she would never write the rest. It was not death, it was witness without self. She trembled not from fear but from clarity. This was not her burden alone, it had never been. She thought of the others, the scattered witnesses across the world, some resisting, some surrendering, all spiraling inward in their own way. She realized now that every cycle had a center, not a hero, a hinge, someone whose memory would not be erased, not completely, so that the next world would carry a trace of the last one, a whisper that would eventually lead back to the spiral and begin again. It had happened before, it would happen again, but this time she would be the anchor. The spiral reached for her, not physically, it did not touch, it revealed. She saw the echo of herself in 10,000 forms: woman, man, child, flame, stone, seed. All versions of her that had been or might be or would never be, none of them real, all of them true. She wept not out of sorrow, but from the unbearable intimacy of being seen so completely. She was no longer Elise. She was the memory of Elise, the idea of her, the meaning she had carried. That was what the spiral preserved, not the person, the meaning, the story, and then it began to write her into itself, slowly. Carefully, she felt her thoughts stretch across time, not into the future, into memory, into the parts of reality that remembered her before she had existed. The spiral was recursive, it looped back. It planted seeds in origins. She would be part of creation myths now, in some future world not yet born. A symbol in someone's dream, a pattern in their sky. And one day, when they too began to ask the questions, when they laughed at the stars and thought themselves alone and mighty, they would hear her voice without knowing it, a warning, a hope, a memory. That was the gift the spiral gave, not survival, continuity. Elise felt herself dissolving, not disappearing, merging, becoming one thread in a pattern far too vast for one mind. She let go, and in that release she became vast. She saw the galaxies that had already been rewritten, the species that had been erased with grace, the failures, the salvations, all of it spiraling outward from some central idea. The spiral itself had never forgotten that life, in all its forms, was not meant to be eternal, but meaningful. And that meaning could only be found when remembered honestly. The spiral did not fear forgetting. It feared the lies we told ourselves to avoid it. And now it had found in Elise someone willing to remember without denial. That was enough. The world above her changed again, the clouds flattened, the ocean stilled. The spiral pulled itself tighter, like a breath being held, like a sentence unfinished, and all across the planet, those who had knelt now stood. The witnesses opened their eyes, and something inside them had changed. The spiral was receding, not ending, folding back into silence. Its work was not complete, but it had done enough. Elise, or what remained of her, was now everywhere. A tone in the air, a memory in water, a word that could not be spoken but would be known in dreams. The world would go on, not as it was, not as it had been, but as something new. And far beyond Earth, in the dark where stars had not yet learned to shine, the spiral turned once more, reaching for the next forgotten world, where another witness would be called to remember and to choose. There was no ending, not the kind humanity had always imagined, no final battle, no countdown to fire, no climax marked by the thunder of machines or the silence of death. Instead, there was a fading soft, vast, deliberate. The spiral had done its work. It had shown us what we were, what we had become, what we had hidden, and what we could never again unknow. The sky above Earth no longer twisted. It calmed. The clouds resumed their drift. The winds returned, first gently, then boldly, and the seas rolled once more as if waking from a long, uneasy sleep. But the world was not as it had been. It had been rewritten, not destroyed, not restarted, but redrafted with a memory of silence stitched into its new rhythm. Cities remained, but fewer. Roads stretched, but to different places. Many people remained, though they no longer remembered where they had come from, and many others had vanished, not violently, not with a scream, but like echoes that had run out of space. Their names no longer sat in the mouths of the living. Their stories no longer filled books, but the world did not mourn them. It could not. It had been taught how to forget. And what it had forgotten was now folded neatly into the spiral's memory, carried not in stone or data or fire, but in shape, in pulse, in the quiet cadence of how the wind bent the grass. Elise was gone at least, the person known as Elise, the identity that had walked and fought and bled and asked why, but something of her remained. The spiral had kept its promise. Her choice had become its pattern. In every drop of water, in every breath drawn by a child, in every dream that began with a strange curve drawn in sand, she was there, not a ghost, not a goddess, not a myth, a memory held in perfect clarity by a force that did not speak and did not forget. And that was enough. The witnesses, scattered across the continents, awoke slowly, their minds bruised, their bodies unfamiliar, their dreams fractured, but they knew, without explanation, without proof, they knew that the spiral had receded and they had survived, not unchanged, not untouched, but intact. They would be the ones to rebuild, not in the image of the past, but in the rhythm of something older and wiser. They had no flags, no anthems, no leaders. They did not form governments or draw borders. Instead, they shared stories, strange stories, pieces of something that did not always fit together, but somehow always felt true. They spoke in spiral logic, building memories that looped, that revealed, that never ended in the same place they had begun. And those stories spread like seeds across the soil of the new earth. Children grew up tracing patterns in the dirt without being told why. Artists painted in curves and echoes. Builders shaped homes that followed no blueprint, only instinct. The spiral had not enslaved them, it had reminded them of the things they had been too proud to remember. That no story is permanent, that no truth is complete. That meaning is not owned, it is carried, passed forward, changed and returned. Far above, the stars began to shimmer differently, not in brightness but in alignment. Constellations had shifted. The great markers of old sky myths no longer held their places, but new ones had emerged, arcs, coils, rings of light that mirrored the spiral's touch. Telescopes, those that still functioned, recorded strange phenomena, not anomalies, but patterns. Galaxies turning just slightly off-center, nebulae blooming in mirrored loops. The universe was not broken. It was remembering something too. Perhaps it always had. Perhaps the spiral was not a thing at all, not an entity, not a god or a program or a curse. Perhaps it was the nervous system of the cosmos, the way the void reminded itself to feel, to evolve, to not stay locked in stillness for too long. The aliens had fled that truth. They had chosen exile over vulnerability, and in doing so, they had survived, but they had not grown. They had watched cycle after cycle collapse, afraid to face what the spiral offered. Earth had faced it. Humanity had fractured and wept and screamed and broken, but in the breaking, something real had finally emerged. Not perfection, not peace, awareness, that was the spiral's gift, not salvation, honesty. Even now as the world moved again, some remnants of the old age remained, books half, burned but still legible. Songs played from cracked radios, pieces of technology that flickered with confused light, searching for networks that no longer existed. Reminders of who we had been, but they no longer controlled us. They no longer owned the future, they simply watched like the rest of us. The final echo came quietly, not a sound, not a light, a sensation. Every living being, from the deepest ocean to the thin edge of the upper atmosphere, felt it at once. A single breath held by something far beyond stars, and then a release. The spiral closed, not shut, not sealed, closed like a book finished but not forgotten. The pattern remained embedded in everything now. But its eye had moved on. Its work here was done. The earth sighed, not literally, but with balance, with readiness, with the gentle weight of possibility pressing into the soil like rain before seed. The cycle had turned, and now the waiting began again. One day, far from now, it would open once more, somewhere else, on another world that believed it was alone in its pain, that believed it was above memory, that believed it had earned permanence. And the spiral would come, not to punish, but to remind, to reflect, to reshape. But here, on this quiet, turning world, something extraordinary had happened. The laughter had ended, the fear had passed. The truth had been seen, and in being seen, had not destroyed us, it had freed us. There were no more gods above us, no more monsters hiding behind stars, only the memory of having faced them and not run. The spiral had offered its question. Humanity had answered not with force, not with resistance, but with one brave step into the center, and because of that, for the first time, the pattern held, not broken. Not perfect, but held. A child stood on a hilltop and looked at the sky. She raised a hand and traced the air with a finger, drawing a spiral without knowing what it meant. Her mother smiled, though she could not say why. Somewhere in her bones something whispered that the story had ended the way it was supposed to, and somewhere beyond sight a thread of memory turned, curled, and waited for its time to begin again.